Dave Nadig is an intentional investor out now. Epsilon Theory YouTube. You're going to love this. We talked about how he's not a latchkey kid. He's a no-lock kid. Love that framing. We talk about his time on live TV sets out in San Francisco, from a runner all the way up to like head of payroll. This career arc will blow your mind as a mini chapter of his life, and life after a traumatic brain injury, from the ETFs to the creativity to raising his family. It's a beautiful life story. Jack Forehand, roll some clips.
We weren't just latchkey kids. There was no lock kids, right? We didn't have, I don't have a lock in my house now. We didn't have a lock in our house growing up, right? These were just old farmhouses. You could go through any window in the house if you wanted to. So come home from school, nobody's home, go down to the farm, etc. So it was very much a living outside between lots of communal spaces. In Hollywood in the late 80s, I started as a runner, meaning literally I would drive my 3-cylinder Yugo at the time because I graduated from the Pontiac Phoenix. I was driving scripts back and forth to talent houses. Like, writers would be done with something at 2, and it's like, you got to get this to Janet by 3:30 in Malibu because she's on air tomorrow at 6 a.m. or whatever. We put cameras on our trading floor. We put all of our, literally as soon as we hit a trade, it went out on our website. And this was in 1998. So this was cutting edge at the time. Nobody was live streaming nothing. And we had live stream video cameras, which we spent tons of money on, literally over the shoulder of our traders. In between then and when I actually have my first date with my wife in San Francisco, I have a terrible climbing fall and smash my head open. I'm lead climbing, and so a piece of rock falls out and I go flying upside down. And because I was a jerk and an egotist, I didn't wear a helmet, of course. So end up upside down, unconscious, hanging by a rope. And of course, I then did not go to the hospital because I was that kind of an idiot. I later ended up in a hospital with an MRI and epilepsy and a brain injury. The shortest way to say it is it softened me. I became much less sure of anything. I became much less edgy about stuff. I think I became less of an asshole and more likely to listen to people. I became very clear that I wanted to build an actual life. I became less concerned with must simply win, which was how I approached everything before, at anybody else's expense. And much more like, no, I actually want to try to build a life.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Ziegler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously. You should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Ziegler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sunpoint Investments.
You're watching The Intentional Investor right here at Epsilon Theory YouTube. I'm Matt Ziegler. This guest, he was unruly before he went cerully, with or without the same associations or associates. We'll get into that probably. He was meta before meta, or meta markets at least. I need stories. And he was CIO at ETF.com before he was, well, almost the same thing again now. And who does that? I'll tell you. The man Jim Cramer's called a criminal on live TV, and the man I've called the Sydney Sweeney of clickbait on YouTube. It was an American Eagle Scout joke. Okay? It's the one and only Dave Nadig, ladies and gentlemen.
Do you wake up in the middle of the night writing your introductions? Do they just come to you in a fit of delusion at 2 a.m.?
A fit of word salad delusion. Washing dishes. Every time it's inappropriate to have my phone and make a note where I'm like, damn it.
That's where it is. Got it.
Yeah, that's where all the inspiration comes. I mean, we're going to get to 1996. I already know this. We were talking for a second before we started. Part of the joy of the show is when you know a chunk of somebody's story, but there's all these other details. And with you, I can truly say, I know a chunk of the story, but there are so many details and I'm going to get lost in them. And I'm very excited for this.
I will tell you anything you want to know. No holds barred. You tell me what you want to know.
All right. Well, I mean, let's start with it just because it's such a great story. Cramer calling you a criminal on live TV. Say what happened. And then I want to know where you were when you found out about this.
So
emotionally.
A partner and I named Don Luskin ran a company called Meta Markets in the middle of the dot-com boom. With all the insanity and stupidity that you would associate with two guys left BGI to go start their own thing. And our whole shtick was we were going to invest out loud. And our first fund, which I was one of the co-PMs on, was called Open Fund. And it was just a blow the doors off, go anywhere tech fund that launched right at the knuckle of the hockey stick. And we put cameras on our trading floor. We put all of our, like literally as soon as we hit a trade, it went out on our website. And this was in 1998. So like this was cutting edge at the time. Nobody was live streaming nothing. And we had live stream video cameras, which we spent tons of money on, literally over the shoulder of our traders on our trading floor in San Francisco. And we were in all the big noisy stocks of the era, JDS Uniphase, WorldCom, whatever it was, we were playing it, trying to get the IPO allocations, all the shoot from the hip stuff. And so consequently, Don and I spent most of our time trying to get on TV pumping our bags. Like everybody else who was an active manager during the dot-com boom was all about like getting the interview and talking your book and being an actual expert as opposed to just sounding like an expert, and hopefully also making money for your clients because we were genuinely trying to do so. And, you know, all my money was in the fund. So I was definitely, you know, investing with the house. And Cramer on what I think was pre-Mad Money did not like the fact that we were out there talking our books at all. And so he went on this rant about how what we were doing was securities fraud, and that way, you know, by pumping our books aggressively, letting people trade, we were inviting front runners. There was a criminal malfeasance against our shareholders. Anyway, he went on this rant like Cramer does, although he does it actually less than he used to. And my business partner, Don Luskin, got really, really worked up about the fact that he had called us criminals on live TV, which even in the pre-Trump era, one of the only things you can really get in trouble for is saying somebody committed a crime when you know for a fact they did not. And so we hired the lawyer that won Carol Burnett's famous defamation case, and like just went in with like both barrels, like, you know, a notice to appear, not even a C&D, just like, no, we are going directly to court in New York City. And of course, he backed off instantly and he gave us an on-air apologies and never talked about us again.
Right. Staying on.
And that's literally one of the only interactions I've ever had with Jim Cramer, despite having been on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange while he's recording at least 100 times.
All right. When you hear this news, like, walk me through how much like, oh crap versus how much like that guy's full of it. Like when you hear that this is happening, that this other media personality is saying this. Yeah. Like, where are you? How does it emotionally hit you?
We ran the firm out of two offices. So our main office was in San Francisco and we had, I don't know, a dozen, 20 people there. And then I had another dozen people literally in my basement in Milton, Massachusetts. And we had cleared out the basement, installed a T1 line, and I had 5 traders down there. Also played a lot of Counter-Strike on that nice internet connection. But we were directly tied into the trading floor in San Francisco. So we were sort of one virtual connected floor. And this all happened while like in the middle of a trading day. This is going off on TV because, you know, back then we had CNBC on with the volume up all day long, every single day, which is a very easy way to go crazy. And I remember getting the instant message from Don, my partner, when this went by on TV, just like this, you know, you can imagine the vitriol and invective and swearing that went on. And like, I was just sort of like, hey, he was talking about us. That's great. I should point out, we were running the most annoying TV ads in the world on CNBC while this was going on. So this happened wedged between ads for our fund, which had the Battle Hymn of the Republic playing behind it or something, like just the worst, most obnoxious ad. And I was just like, he's talking about us. That's great. And then the next thing I know, he's like, well, our lawyers have already drafted the letter of agreement with the other law firm, and we're going to take him to court by the end of the week. And that was just like, whatever, man. We had so much going on.
All right. There's a long story leading up to moments like this, and then even getting remotely close to today, which I'm confident we're not even going to get. You're on my round 2 list.
Well, you dropped right in the middle. I was like 30 something when that happened.
But how many people can say they had that experience? That's been, let alone.
It would have been more fun if we'd actually gone to court, right?
Listen, you might have gotten a book deal out of that one.
I could have.
You wouldn't just be on this crummy show. What to get to that point though, that's a real experience. Let's talk about the commercials just for a second. What are these commercials you guys are running? Why were they so obnoxious?
I'm not proud of these at all. I was not in charge of marketing, but the ads had all of these individual actors doing the Pledge of Allegiance, but they were saying their Pledge of Allegiance to our fund because it was open and free. And Don was like a crazy libertarian back before that became a really dirty word. And so he was just like, we're democratizing investing, but he meant it in a way people don't mean it now. And so we literally had, going on behind, literally whistling out of the TV while people were doing, I pledge allegiance. Anyway, it was a heck of an ad, and people definitely noticed it. And we got like $100 million off of it. So like it worked.
Look,
and then
raising money is raising money. All right, take me all the way back. Town you're born and raised. Like where's young Davey Nadig?
Lenox, Massachusetts. Moved here when I was 5, about a mile from where I'm standing right now. And born in Connecticut in Stanford Hospital. My dad was a school teacher at a day school down in Connecticut somewhere. But most of my life is a series of my dad losing jobs from drinking too much. So the first time he lost his job, I was 5, and we ended up here in Lenox. I think mostly because it was cheaper and because it's where all the hippies had gone. This was like a major sort of draft dodger 1960s, early 70s mecca for that. There were a bunch of roadhouses with bands, a lot of theater, a lot of weed farms, like everything you need to run a nice hippie subculture was here in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. And I grew up on the sort of attached farmhouse to a farm that a friend of mine ended up buying when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I had this rich kid moved in next door, and they became effectively my surrogate family. And I grew up on that farm and with this friend's family largely until I went off to school. So most of my young life and my early teen years were actually living on the dole of this wealthy family next door who owned and ran a farm. That's sort of my life.
Okay, Dad starts off, and I know there's lots of dad career stories. Mom in the picture?
Mom held crap together, like a lot of women who I think got married in the early 60s, coming out of that world. She pieced together various pieces of work. She was a school teacher for a really long time. She was a school teacher for me until I was like 8 or 9. Eventually, she became the lead costumer for Shakespeare and Company, which is one of the largest Shakespeare programs in the world. A job she just retired from at the age of 82, 83 recently, and crushed all the way through. Built this incredible collection, put on thousands of plays, touring productions all over the world. And so I grew up in this weird combination of the farm, where I was sort of growing up and getting most of my calories, and my mom's shop, where I was, playing with the costumes and the armor and the swords and, running through the hallways with helmets on and stuff.
That's amazing. Okay. Young Dave, when you're relocated, you're like, let's go to the elementary school years. There's mom's shop. There's this farm you're living on with the surrogate family. Is it just outdoor life and stuff?
The stereotype people have of Gen Xers, particularly older Gen Xers who were genuinely raised by like early hippies, which is definitely my vibe, right? And I know a lot of people who fit this mark too. We weren't just latchkey kids. There was no lock kids, right? We didn't have I don't have a lock in my house now. We didn't have a lock in our house growing up, right? These were just old farmhouses. You could go through any window in the house if you wanted to. So, come home from school, nobody's home, go down to the farm, etc. So it was very much a living outside between lots of communal spaces environment. School wasn't particularly great. I was always very smart, but I was also, until like I was 17, I was spherical. So like I wasn't out in the hiking world. I was a Boy Scout, but I was always the one at the back of the hike, barely getting to mile 5, So that was, any athleticism came well after puberty.
Friends, like, is the neighbor a good friend?
So like to this day, my 2 best friends are the ones that I grew up with. I'm known since 2nd grade, 3rd grade, generally. And so I feel very grateful for that. Like I had a lot of the things people associate as benefits of being in a small town in New England, pre-internet, pre-cell phones, I walked a mile and a half to town to go, get a soda and shoplift a comic book, right? That was the extent of my exposure. I think I went to New York when I was 14 on a bus trip once. That was sort of my 13, 14, and then became very attracted to the city and all that stuff. But until puberty, I was just a fairly isolated kid living in pretty rural, hippie New England.
All right, rural hippie New England. Are you starting to find stuff that you're interested in? Are you finding music or comic books? Or
I found the library. The biggest thing I found was the Lenox Library, which had a phenomenal collection. Even then, had at least 4 or 5 long boxes of comics. So this what's that, 300-400 comics of Silver Age stuff that I just devoured. Like, somebody had donated a collection at some point. All the early Jack Kirby stuff. I mean, everything I could get my hands on. I would walk into town after school and I'd sit in the basement of the library with the long box and read stuff. And then they had a pretty good fantasy and science fiction sort of couple shelves. I read through that from A to Z. Like, I literally just started at the top left when I was like 8 and just started working my way through the 2 shelves of sci-fi and fantasy. So that was big. My dad was a jazz musician, hence the drunk. Like, drunk and jazz musician seems to go together.
Go hand in hand.
At least in the 60s and 70s. And so music was just always around. If he was in the house, music was playing, which is without question. It was almost exclusively jazz. And so my sister and I inevitably rebelled against that with the loudest rock music we could possibly find, which wasn't much to write home about in the 70s. But yeah, the music became a battleground between me and my dad. I wish it hadn't been. I now look back and realize how much I learned from him and how much I got from him. And in our later years before he passed, we talked a lot about it and played music together and all that. But growing up, music was a weapon, right? I knew it was important to him. And so, that first time I could get, I don't even remember what it was, some 1979 punk album I got from the store in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and played it as loud as I possibly could just to annoy the crap out of him,
Is that were you acquiring your own records, tapes, and you and your sister too? Like, that's...
Not a lot. I mean, we were, I don't want to oversell it. We always had enough food on the table and people were taking care of us and I always had a roof over my head, but there was not any disposable income. So, and what there was went right into my dad's gullet. So, I had, by the time I went to college at 15, I had 1 milk crate full of records. So like, I'd managed to acquire maybe 50 albums that were really important to me. And then by the time we get into the 80s, it becomes mixtape era. And then it's just cassettes everywhere.
All right. College at 15. What the hell is this?
I've
said this before. I don't know if I know this story.
No, there's no like, Dave's a genius. This was
no Doogie Howser here.
Manipulate the system to escape my home life.
How does this happen?
I went to 1 year at a school my dad was teaching at. I skipped my 9th grade year so that I could go to the school my dad was teaching at, which was technically an all-girls school, but this 1 year they were letting boys in because the enrollment was so low. He lost that job, of course, the next year. And so I did 1 year there and then basically just ripcorded and went to community college. It's right about when my mom left my dad, somewhere in there. So I ripcorded, went to community college for like 2 semesters and got A's. And then that let me, I figured this all out ahead of time. If you had so many credits at a community college with such a score, you could just show up at a UMass and there was no even application process back then. It was literally just, you just transferred your stats over. So they never asked about a high school diploma, which I don't have, or a GED, which I don't have. It's just literally nobody ever asked. It was never on any form. All they cared about was, he's got 32 credits and has got a 4.0 average. And so from there, I did another 3 years at UMass. And so I was out at 18, 19 out of college, which was a mistake. Like there's not a lot of benefit of getting ahead of that early. I wasted a couple of years floundering around. I had a bad marriage when I was 21, like plenty of damage from that. But what it did was it got me out of my hometown. It got me away from my dad. It got me away from the family. So my mom felt like I think she could leave my dad because now neither my sister and I were there and she didn't feel like she had to take care of us. So as soon as I got into a dorm, she was gone.
She was gone. Being a kid and that self-promotion of like being out there, being in a dorm, of just being out there at college. Like all of a sudden you don't have the same peer group. You know it's not normal. You're aware of it, but you're like, well, this is what I'm doing. And granted, everybody around you is like, that's not normal. What's that like?
Like I said, I don't think it wasn't positive. Like I don't have any trauma from it. Nothing awful
Right.
happened to me, but being a 15-year-old in the UMass dorms is not a good job, man. That's like,
No.
I mean, I suppose there were moments like, sure, I had some early girlfriends, like, like
Sure.
I got to go to a bunch of parties younger than other people. I got to make some dumbass mistakes and like, discover what a hangover was before I was 18. I don't think that's a win, right? I think
Yeah.
that was mostly an error. So it was a trade-off, one or the other. But, look, I had an amazing college experience. I found groups of friends. I found the radio station. I found the science fiction club. I found the fencing society, like all the stuff that was there, right? Because I came from a town of 3,000 people, and then I show up with 50,000 people at UMass Amherst. I was like a kid in a candy shop, like for the good parts,
For the good parts, let's go through a couple of these. Radio station. I want to hear about the radio station, the sci-fi club specifically. Like this is like you walk through the student center and there's a sign on the wall that's like,
Yep,
come on Tuesday night.
absolutely.
This
So
type of deal?
UMass Amherst is a giant edifice to brutalist architecture. These giant concrete slab buildings, which have their own beauty in a certain way. They don't have the sort of fatalist quality of like Baltimore, like the parts of Baltimore, or like Melbourne,
Poor Baltimore.
Australia. No, the parts of it that were clearly built by government contractors that look terrible.
I'll let you know when they do the Wire Amherst.
But you know exactly what I mean.
I know. I've been on
It's
that
not
campus
that
many
sad.
times.
It's not like government building sad,
Yeah.
but it was like its own brutalism. And so there's this giant campus center complex, which has, the theater that holds 1,000 people and all that stuff. And tucked in the corners are all the clubs. And one of the little corners was the newspaper and the radio station right next to each other, where I spent a ton of time between the two because I took pictures what I really did was I used being at the radio station to get the gigs to take pictures of the bands that came because I wasn't old enough to get in. So like any show that was carded, I couldn't get in, and I didn't have a good enough fake ID to get into the Blue Wall in UMass. But if I was the photographer and I had a press badge, nobody carded me. So I took pictures of bands for I think it was the Minuteman, the UMass Minuteman. And that was sort of how I closed the circle on that in between the two. And then right across the hall from that was the science fiction library, which was really just like 12 racks of science fiction books, and people sat in between them. And it was just, we used it as a lounge, even though there was really nowhere to sit. And so like I knew a dozen or 20 people from that, and that became my D&D group and all the people I played games with and went to, science fiction conventions and all that jazz. And the overlap between those three groups, the newspaper, the sci-fi nerds, and the radio was, not a perfect Venn diagram, but pretty overlapping.
Did you find that the friendships, relationships in those smaller communities was that much easier to be accepted? Might be overstating it, but just like you could just be absorbed into this group of people and it helped?
More than I'd experienced. I mean, a missing thread of everything we've talked about is like, I was not neurologically normal anywhere through all of this. When I was younger, I expressed more traditionally autistic behaviors, a lot of flapping, a lot of repetitive behaviors, circle walking. And I had real difficulty interacting with people pretty often. I had learned by the time we'd moved a few times and I'd gotten to try it in different communities, I'd gotten much better at masking by the time I got to college. So by the time I got to college, I was not objectively, oh, this kid has autism bad. But by the same token, I was with I was with the science fiction nerds and the guys at the computer center. So like gamers found game, we all found each other to some extent. And I don't want to over stereotype like all nerds have neurotypical issues, but in my case, I found plenty of people who were as much like me or more so. And I felt much more comfortable being with that crew of weirdos than I did, the guys who were going to the football game on Sunday. So
Yeah.
I found my little weird, nerdy subculture. I never really broke into the music part of that in college because that was all like 23-year-olds who played instruments. And so for the age gap there, when I was a sophomore in college, the college bands were almost 10 years older than I was. And they were all in college because that's sort of how that happens.
Yeah. which is a whole other dynamic in and of itself. But you're able to get the press pass. You're able to go see some groups, take some pictures.
I've got some great pictures sitting up here on like literal old slides, and a couple of pictures from the Minuteman magazine, a couple of videos. There's 1 or 2 videos from the Blue Wall. If you go look for Blue Wall, Massachusetts, 1984 to 1988, there's some great old grainy, straight out of, the community TV center video of those things that I was behind. So I got to see Black Flag there a couple times. I got to see great bands come through. I mean, in the 80s, everybody came through Amherst.
It was a real stop. Western Mass had some really cool things going on, largely because of the weird old hippie commune nature of.
Yeah, I mean, we had some of that. Like in the Berkshires, we had James Taylor, and we had Arlo Guthrie, and way back when Woody Guthrie, and all the folk musicians came through. And I remember as a young kid, my dad knew that crew of people. Joan Baez, like all the famous folk musicians came through. Odetta. I mean, I think I probably seen most of the greatest hits of the late 60s and early 70s because they just rolled through the Berkshires or Western Mass in general. And then when the punk scene hit, by the time you get into the early new wave stuff, like mid 80s, 84, 85, and I'm at UMass Amherst, there's like 3 or 4 venues in Amherst where people are just coming through all the time. The only one that I really got to see bands with was the one at UMass because that was where I could get in.
Yeah, well, either way, all sorts of great music going on in that part of the country. Underrepresented. Shout out to the Pixies. They're straight out of that school, right?
Yeah, and
a little bit later.
Well, also like Mighty Mighty Bosstones.
Yeah,
and
Bosstones.
And
a little bit more
Black Flag, for whatever reasons, I think I'm going to blank on the name. The drummer from Black Flag in the 80s lived in Western Mass, if I recall. And
one of them's from there. Robo or one of them was from there before he went out west. Or I don't remember. Yeah.
They play up in North Adams all the time. I never got to see any of those concerts. But they played a lot of cool, sketchy places in Western Mass.
Here's the bands playing at sketchy places. So school ends. Like, what's the end of the college experience like? Because you're so young.
I graduated in a mid-year thing. Like, and I don't know anybody in my school. I know the people from the places every person I know is from one of the places that I've just mentioned to you. So like, I wasn't going to go to graduation. I had no connection with the school qua school. I had the places that I went, and I got out of the dorms as fast as I could. I had a friend I moved in with, but as soon as I graduated, my sister had moved to LA, and and at that point I'm 19, something like that. And I had a lease in my own place, but like there was no money around at all. So my sister had a place in Pasadena where she said I could sleep for a while. So I drove across the country to Pasadena in my 1972 Pontiac Phoenix, and which died as soon as I got to LA. And then I slept on her floor for a number of months, and I just picked up like gig work doing construction and stuff on film sets. I knew a lot of theater, technical theater stuff because I'd grown up around it. Like I knew how to build a set. I knew how to hang lights. I knew how to run a soundboard. And so I just found enough stuff in Hollywood to piece that together, and eventually ended up at ABC television on a live show called Home, which was a 90-minute home improvement show 5 days a week. If you can imagine that much, like 7.5 hours of live TV a week we had to fill. And that was an enormously great experience because live TV is the best thing in the world. It doesn't really exist anymore, but I love doing live TV. And I turned 21 there, met a woman, fell in love, and got married, all in a 2 to 3 year window in LA, most of which was a mistake.
All right. Marriages and divorces aside for a second, this live TV show. We've all made relationship mistakes. Show. Let's talk about the home show for a second. What are you doing on set? This is like finding a whole new little.
This is the thing, right? I think that this is the thing I think Gen Z is right to be mad about, because if you were Gen X and early Gen X, we were the drop off of the baby boom, right? So there was nobody our age. We grew up in a vacuum of labor, and so in Hollywood in the late 80s. I started as a runner, meaning literally I would drive my 3-cylinder Yugo at the time because I graduated from the Pontiac Phoenix. I was driving scripts back and forth to talent houses. Like writers would be done with something at 2, and it's like, you got to get this to Janet by 3:30 in Malibu because she's on air tomorrow at 6 a.m. or whatever. And so
this is how TV works, which most people don't even understand.
Right. So I just was driving crap around LA for the first 3 or 4 months. And then the guy who was doing payroll disappeared. I don't know whether he had an accident or died or whatever. but people knew I knew how to use computers. And so I went straight from guy who nobody knows the last name of, who's clearly underage, driving scripts around LA in a 3-cylinder car, to running payroll for the show literally in the middle of a day. Like I go from I used to go surfing down in Malibu. That would start my day. And then I'd usually have a first pickup for somebody down like 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And then I'd drive all the way into the studio. By the time I got to the studio, they'd changed my job. And they'd said, Dave, you know computers, go talk to the accountant. And so I went and talked to the accountant. I learned how to do payroll. 6 weeks after that, the accountant, who was technically called the production coordinator, but what they were was the firm accountant, they'd quit. And I got their job knowing nothing about money and just knowing about computers because I was a nerd. So in the course of some number of months, I went from the lowest person on the totem pole to the one who had signing authority for everything in the production. Just insane, right? Objectively insane. And then by the time I left 2 years later, I looked around and everybody in what we would normally consider a middle management position was under the age of 23. Everyone. It was just children running everything. And that's what the 80s were like. If you were Gen X, everything was available to you because there was nobody to do anything.
Yeah. In these, I don't want to call them new industries, but like that era of TV was also, this was a new approach to how to fill these
everything was
hours
changing constantly. I mean,
right.
one of the, I got so many gigs simply because I was relatively computer friendly. Like one of my first side gigs I got was running the Chiron machine, the thing that put the bottom third on something. Doing that on live TV, there's a machine where you're like literally loading this in and it gets written to a 3.5-inch floppy disk. And then that becomes the show stack. And like there was a whole computerized process, which was fundamentally working with an IBM 386 computer that just ended up spitting out something on a video screen that nobody knew how to use because it was like, well, wait, how do you get the disk out of the drive? I mean, fundamental, like what we would joke about boomers not knowing technology now, except they were 30 then, right? They still didn't know how to use technology.
Well, you were still there to figure it. You're like, just
I got
press
to
the
do
button.
Chiron on like 2 Academy Award shows because literally nobody else would use the machine.
All right. And maybe it's just like a Gen X hardwiring or something and it's an exposure thing. It's not exclusive to Gen X. It's just more concentrated in this Gen X demographic who experiences this thing. Like you're 21 years old, you're in charge of the finances for this show. You've seen the progression in like just a few years of first I was doing this, now I'm doing this. Do you feel, what's your awareness of like the rest of adulthood? Like young Dave looking up, are you like, this is all just a shit show?
No, I was driven mostly for a long time as a young man. I was driven as a counter to my dad, right? Done enough therapy. I can say that out loud on TV now, right? Like I became obsessed with making money because my father never had any. I became obsessed with control because my father never had any, right? So like I had all those really classic responses. So as soon as I got that gig where I started to actually touch money, I was like, ooh, I need to really understand this because clearly understanding money is how you get more money. And so I went straight from that to business school. Like I went straight from Cap Cities ABC in Los Angeles to the University of Massachusetts in Boston in their BU MBA program.
All right. What's the
BU MBA?
What's the exit like? Does the show end or are you just like, it's time to go get my
No, I just started applying to schools. Like as soon, like I had this gig sort of running the money part. And then I got an employee and they were the ones now cutting the checks. And then they put me in charge of like scheduling and 3 writers. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't actually have any skills about any of the money stuff. I was fascinated by it. I'd been reading The Economist since I was 13 or something when I'd asked for it for Christmas. So like I was fascinated by money and markets and politics and all that jazz. But I was the guy who was painting sets. Like I was never going to touch that. So we reached a point where I was like, maybe I actually have enough experience now that an MBA makes sense for me. And I got sold the bill of goods around why everybody should get an MBA, which in the 80s was, everybody was getting their MBAs. I'm very grateful I did. The MBA program I was at Boston University, without a doubt, set the path for my entire career since then. That was a case where I got pretty much a pointless education in college. I mean, I was a poetry major, technically, a creative writing poetry major, even worse. Like, how are you going to judge that? And then, like, I didn't get much out of college at all in terms of education. I think came out dumber than I went in. My MBA program, and I went in, I worked my ass off. I did very well, and I learned a ton. And by the time I got out of B school, Kurt Cerulli and I had started Cerulli Associates. So, like, we'd already built a business that for my last semester, I was working every day and taking my last classes at night.
Okay. Only because of the jumping. You're on the East Coast. You go out to the West Coast. What was the pull back to Boston, or just because they were pitching the MBA program?
I didn't love LA. Nothing against Southern California. I enjoy visiting it, but living in LA in the 80s was like one of the most plastic experiences of my life. And it's obviously it's different now. And I don't really have a sense for what it's like to live there in 2025. But in 1987 to 1990 or whatever that was, it was beyond artificial in a way that before the internet meant something even different, because if you were putting on airs, like, you had to be really aggressive about it. Like, you had to be showing up in the car and wearing the clothes and going to the event to be seen doing the thing in order to put out your image. And so it was performative in a way that even social media is not performative, in that you had to actually get out there and perform if you cared about status and money and Hollywood and fame and all that thing. And, you know, as much as I maintained who I am, I never found a group of folks like me in LA. Everybody just seemed obsessed with, you know, that sort of hustle culture for fame and glory. And it was just never me. And I became much more interested in how things worked behind the scenes. Like, I loved the process of learning live TV. Nobody else I was working with, except one guy, Joel Ardesky, who's still a dear friend, nobody else seemed to be into it as much as I would. Even the people running it, they're just like, oh yeah, isn't it great? We got 7.5 hours of live TV. I can make some great money on that. We get this 3 or 4 years. I get all my union points. Like, that was why people were into it. And I was just like, you mean we start here and you push this button and then 10 million people and guys on oil rigs are watching, Martha Stewart show people how to make holiday decorations? This is insane. Like, it literally, that connection from one to the other was bananas. And so I loved the process, and that's what drove me into business school, because I loved seeing how the sausage was getting made.
All right, the business school story. How do you meet Monsieur Cerulli, and how's this whole thing happen?
Because his now wife, Mary Cerulli, became one of my dearest friends in school. Like, she was a colleague of mine, much smarter than I was. Still passionately involved in environmental activism, was back then. So we just hit it off really well and became study partners and did all our group work together. And we had a nice, cool group of 4 to 6 of us that kind of just all worked together for 2 years in B school. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I met Kurt, some party or something like that. And he and I hit it off. And he was at the time had just left Fidelity, where he was doing advisor services or some sort of distribution kind of role like that. And again, sort of proto-internet, we were trying to figure out, like, okay, what does the future of understanding markets look like in a world where, you know, you can email 1,000 people and get them to respond to something. And so we, having no idea what we were doing, we just sort of put a business together, hired a couple of kids from business school with us, like, you know, so it sort of became a feeder into CA, Cerulli Associates. And I did that for about 1.5 years. And then Barclays, well, back then, Wells Fargo Nico eventually became iShares, but through the chain of events, that proto firm just got really tired of paying my consulting bills and kept making me offers to leave. And eventually they made a big enough one that I said goodbye to Kurt. And he's taken that business, and it's huge, like 200 people now. It's a massive business.
Massive business. What was the original idea, just trying to figure out, what was the original idea for what the business was for Cerulli Associates?
Help asset managers understand financial advisors in a world where that was changing very quickly. So we were right there talking about the move towards defined contribution plans and the advisor's role there, the move towards dual licensed insurance brokers, the move towards fee-only financial advisors versus commissions. And all of that was happening as we're just starting to see the proto funds that would become ETFs, right? There's a post 87. So we're just getting the SEC report on everything that's broken about market structure. Fidelity's trying to get into indexing. Everybody's trying to figure out how the market was going to rearrange post the crash and post the regulatory changes, like TAMRA and things at the time. And so our job was, let's go talk to all the buyers, and then we'll turn that into a product that we will then sell to all of the actual buyers, the ones who are going to buy from us. So we just had big consulting projects initially from Fidelity and State Street and all the Putnam, all the big firms of the time. And then slowly that became the Cerulli report. It became more of a product we could sell. But initially it was just raw consulting.
How'd you like being a raw consultant? How'd that suit you?
Terrible at it. Like going into a room full of people, establishing a bunch of relationships, getting them to trust you, and then getting them to talk to you is like a definition of not my skill set. Like that is like the anti-Dave skills. I was not good at it. To give me the data, let me have lots of one-on-one conversations with people. That's great. But anything that veers on a cocktail party, let me explain why you should want to talk to me in this room full of 30 people. Awful. And a lot of consulting is like that. A lot of consulting is presenting your findings to the 26 people at the board meeting and selling yourself and your services to a reluctant buyer. And I'm just not actually very good at any of that.
It's interesting, especially coming out of the whole status, fame. It wasn't a personal brand yet, but whatever you called that in plastic Hollywood experience, into the consulting experience and being like, nope, not this either. Those are related things, but they're just clearly not you.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I was a very different person back then. It's just worth saying. I made a lot of dumb mistakes from like the age of 18 to the age of 26, which included getting married and divorced and having lots of sort of ego spirals of my own. And I don't look back on much of it with a lot of praise for who I was then. I mean, gratitude because I survived it, got through it, and made me who I am, and I'm at peace with it. But I wouldn't want to hang out with me from 1988 to 1996 necessarily. Not the best version of me.
It's good to be able to say that, be gracious for it, and keep moving forward because, hey, life keeps moving forward.
Yeah.
What happens after you finally leave that contract, if you part ways with Kurt? What's the next thing? Where do you...
San Francisco.com boom. So I moved to San Francisco in 92, 93-ish somewhere. And I did like a 5-year stint-ish with what became Barclays Global Investors. My initial job there was actually creating Barclays Global Investors because Wells Fargo was selling. And so they sold to Barclays. And then working on the first target date funds. So the LifePath mutual funds they were a consulting project I worked on. So as a consultant at Cerulli, I was working with Wells Fargo to launch the LifePath funds. They were getting the patent filed and all that stuff. That's where I met my ultimate partner, Don Luskin. And so I worked with them on that. And then when I came over, I was originally doing sort of marketing and product positioning around LifePath and getting into the 401k market. I ended up running the 401k business there for a year or two. And then everything turned towards selling the company. So I turned towards being part of the sales team. And then after it became BGI and merged with Barclays, there was a window of just firing everybody. So I spent my last year there almost entirely in Australia and Japan firing everybody, just running around I did like, I think 9 circuits of the world, like 6 weeks in Australia, 2 weeks in Japan, a month in London, a month in Boston, back to San Francisco, just this loop for a year or two. It was a huge grind and, did not enjoy firing lots and lots and lots of people. But I mean, that's just how that used to work, right? It was like, oh, well, we have 2 offices in Australia and 250 people. We probably only need 100. Oops. Send the 26-year-old.
He's got the emotional skills to get this done and process this, probably.
Yeah, no, it was not a great emotional time for me. But in the middle of all that, I met my wife. So that was the best part. And I also had a huge accident that gave me a traumatic brain injury and changed my personality a decent amount. So like when I say I'm a different person, like legit, I'm kind of a different person.
All right. this is important because these things happen in sequence. So moving backwards, we're gonna get to brain injury.
I love that you're that interested in
Then
it. I feel like that's okay.
you're not gonna be that interested when I ask you this. So we're gonna get to brain injury. I want to hit the meeting wife story because I don't know this. And then before that, did you really see Tricky at Slim's like in this?
I did.
He's just like, what the hell was that like?
No, like
I mean, just that whole.
this requires no street cred on my part. From 1992 to 1998 in San Francisco, you could walk into virtually any venue south of Market on any given night and see incredible music. Like this is the rise of grunge. This is a ska revival. This is trip hop. This is like, I mean, I can't give you the list of bands because we literally just used to walk into places. And then like you'd walk out being like, who is that? Oh, that was so-and-so, that was Elliott Smith. I thought he was dead. Not yet. Like, I mean, it was shit like that. It was insane. And it was like coffee shops. Like you'd walk into coffee shops and some guitarist for Pearl Jam would be in the back working on a tune. Yeah. Like it was insane. San Francisco in the 90s was insane.
I found this after a other conversation that we had, the Just Press Record conversation that's out by the time this is out. And I ended up on this like San Francisco Chronicler or like one of those. And it was just like
looking at old posters and stuff.
It was like this history of Slim's post. And it was just, here's the time No Doubt opened up for Dance Hall Crashers before that inverted.
Exactly. And you're just like, or American Music Hall, which kind of became a big thing right then.
Oh yeah. Right.
It was bonkers. It was bonkers.
It's a very cool thing that you were that age in that and you could just walk into those rooms. So that's just wild.
I mean, San Francisco was great for three things: technology, music, and Magic the Gathering. That's in the 90s. That's what ruled my world.
All right. One Magic the Gathering story, at least. Like was there a spot? Were there multiple spots?
Carl's Jr. on Market Street, which was it's about a quarter mile up from the water. So it's not on the good part of Market Street. It's kind of getting into the sketchy part of Market Street. There used to be a giant Virgin mega store right there. I think it's probably Sansome or Sutter right there. Anyway, there was a Carl's Jr. there, which was just a Carl's Jr., but it had this enormous basement that was the size of the whole through block that you could sit at least 150 people in. Still looked just like a Carl's Jr., like the plastic seats and you couldn't move the chairs, the whole 9 yards. But a fast food table's just about enough space to play a game of Magic. And so at the peak, it was every night, but it tended to get a little bit more organized. You go to Rec Games MTG on Usenet, and they would tell you where they were playing, and we would just play like all the freaking time. But back then, we played for money, or we played for ante, right? And so most people played for ante, where literally you flipped your top card up, and if you won, the other person kept it. So it put a lot of pressure on what cards you played. That died out quickly once people started buying cards for like, this is $100,
Right.
And I, for a while, was the guy with the briefcase and the binders selling cards to the 17-year-old kids out of my binder because I had Wall Street money, right? So like, I was just buying boxes. Like if it was a new set dropped, I'd buy 2 boxes and then go figure out the rares I wanted from the store. And then I would just sell everything else to all the kids at the Carl's Jr.
The Carl's Jr. basement. Man,
Yeah.
I think all right, these are wild times. How do you meet your wife? Where's that come into it?
So girlfriend stories aside, I'm divorced at this point. I have a girlfriend that I don't have a great relationship with. I'm living with in San Francisco. I'm really sure that I want to break up with her, but we're living together and it's complicated. So a bunch of friends of mine are like, we should go on a vacation. They book this guy's trip to Turks and Caicos Islands, the Club Med down there called Turquoise.
Excellent.
As a guy's trip to help me break up with my girlfriend. That's literally the express purpose.
So it's an intervention.
It's an intervention is basically what it is. And it's a scuba diving trip. And so we go for 8 days or whatever. We have a great trip. And one of the people on our dive boat is now my wife, was the only woman on the boat, was the only solo person on the boat. Everybody else was like coupled up. I mean, I guess there were couples of people, but there was the only solo woman on the boat. And she was there with her sorority sisters, and none of them scuba dive. So it tells you a lot about my wife. She's like, well, screw it. I'm just going to bring all my gear. I'm going to go scuba diving by myself on my sorority trip. As a young woman, which she did, and she ended up being buddies with my friend, like dive buddies with my friend.
Sure.
And then I just spent the entire week hitting it. I mean, nothing more complicated than that. And
Yeah.
then asked her for a date on the way, literally getting on the bus to leave. I was like, hey, you're from San Francisco. I'm from San Francisco. We both happen to be in the Caribbean. That seems fated. I should ask you for a date. And she sort of turned around and said, well, it depends whether you break up with your girlfriend, because I'd been ratted out by my friends by
Yeah,
that
of course. Right. They're like, this is the perfect trigger that we
So
can
I
now
broke up
use
with
to-
my girlfriend in the airport on the way, which I'm not really proud of.
Sorry.
Like I said, I used to be a lot more of an asshole. And then in between then and when I actually have my first date with my wife in San Francisco, I have a terrible climbing fall and smash my head open. And literally, she doesn't quite get this. She really only knows me post brain injury, because we met pre brain injury, but like we, exchanged stupid human tricks over a dinner table. We didn't actually get to know each other.
Right.
So it's sort of a weird thing that way.
So what's the brain accident? What actually happens?
So I used to do a lot of rock climbing, and I had, there's a place in California called Lover's Leap, which is a lovely sort of multi-pitch area, sort of 3 to 4 pitches of climbing, some couple hundred feet. And on the second to last pitch on a beautiful climb, just a piece of rock falls out, and I'm lead climbing. And so a piece of rock falls out and I go flying upside down. And because I was, a jerk and an egotist, I didn't wear a helmet, of course. So end up, upside down, unconscious, hanging by a rope. My young, fairly inexperienced climbing partner sitting there crying and not happy about it, because she's literally holding me while I'm hanging, from this.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then she has to begin the fairly complex process of how do you rescue somebody from that situation, because now I'm hanging over there and she's on a ledge over here. And so over the course of an hour, she figures it out. I have very little recollection of it, but she Jumar'd me. If you know what Jumars are, the little things that run up the rope. Like you sometimes see people ice climbing and they're doing this on the rope. So she makes Jumars out of rope and literally hauls me up the next 100 feet of this, because I'm fairly delusional. I mean, I was able to help. I remember sort of coming to and being able to help in the last bit of it, but that's like 40 feet above where I was hanging, literally just swinging on a rope.
Just limp. Yeah.
And so anyways, this woman, incredible woman, probably saved my life, but also just what a badass. Like, she was 5 foot nothing soaking wet. And I'm like 170, just hauling me literally hand over hand up over. Anyway, long story short, short story long. And of course I then did not go to the hospital because I was that kind of an idiot. I later ended up in a hospital with an MRI and epilepsy and a brain injury, but at the time I did nothing because I was a total fucking moron.
Youth and head trauma. What do you think? What's the brain injury do to you? You've hinted at it a couple of times. What's it do to your personality? What's it do?
Yeah, it's the easiest, the shortest way to say it is it softened me. Like I became much less sure of anything. I became much less edgy about stuff. I think I became less of an asshole and more likely to listen to people. I've had that reported to me, at least by people who've known me across the boundary. It definitely slowed me down in a way. Like a lot of the young male testosterone take over the world stuff that we'd associate with aggressive crypto bros right now. Like I had all that running through me. And after the injury, it wasn't just that I had the wake up call kind of thing that I think trauma does to a lot of people. No, I was just different. Like I was just different, is the easiest way I can explain it. I didn't all of a sudden stop caring about things I used to care about. It wasn't like I was a totally different person. But it's definitely, I mean, I then developed epilepsy, and that definitely changed, lots of my running life. So,
Yeah. Do you think that changed as much philosophically as you saw life as it did something physically? Or how do you separate those two parts?
Yeah, it definitely did. I think this is probably more just the trauma experience than like my neurology shifting, but I became very clear that I wanted to build an actual life. Like I became less concerned with must simply win, which was how I approached everything before, at anybody else's expense, and much more like, no, I actually want to try to build a life. And for sure imprinted on my wife with that very quickly. Like we had a very, intense initial relationship. We were married within a year of starting dating, had kids a couple years after that. Like we got going, and that was new to me. Like if you had asked me 3 weeks before I had the accident, would I ever think about having kids again or ever get married again? Because I was looking back on that with just horrible disdain. Of course, none of that was my fault at that point. I had no self-awareness of any of my part of any of that. It was all definitely somebody else's problem. And like, I no longer felt that way with weeks later. I was like, oh no, that was definitely all my problem. And like, so this began a process of really being honest about my neurology and doing therapy and, a lot of medication for quite a while. And then a lot of meditation after that.
Where's life steer you there at that phase? Like, what are you doing for work at that phase?
So that happened right towards the end of my stint at BGI. So I was in San Francisco. It was sort of the last year there. I think the willingness to jump from what was a phenomenal, I mean, if I'd stayed there, I would have made way more money. There's no question about it. I mean, the folks who stayed from that window and stayed in that. I mean, I was a managing director. I was getting extraordinary. I've never been paid as well paid as I was paid in the 90s. And if I'd stayed there, there'd be tens of millions of dollars sitting in bank accounts somewhere that I don't have. And I'm extraordinarily grateful because what I actually wanted was to go do my own thing and to do it in my own terms. And that's what we did. So my partner and I, we sort of quit in a fit of pique. Shortly after I finished firing everybody, they sort of forgot that I was around. And instead of trying to get my old job back, I was like, see ya. You want to fire me? Give me severance? That's awesome. And so, that was right around then. And so that sort of bridges into coming back to Boston for my wife to get her MBA, we ended up back in Boston after that San Francisco stint. And that's, begin sort of a long stint of career around ETFs.
When she comes back to the MBA, do you have something lined up, or was it the commitment together of it's your turn to go pursue this and I'll figure out what I'm doing next?
We've never been the kind of couple that keeps track of score or turns or anything much like that.
Not so much for score, just like that's another big decision to come back across the country again.
The dot-com boom money certainly helped. That
Sure.
smoothed a lot of things over. So, nobody had to take out loans for anything and all that kind of stuff. So that was really helpful. But, she went to business school and then got a job at Accenture. And then right around then, the dot-com boom ended. And so I ended up unemployed for 4 or 5 years, effectively. So 2000 to 2004, 5, my wife's pretty much the breadwinner. So that was kind of a fairly significant shift. And after 9/11, by 9/11, the business had been closed already. We'd sort of shut it down in an orderly fashion. We were starting some new things and had new ideas, and then 9/11 happened and that shut everything right down. And then within 2 or 3, so we had nothing going on at that point, right? I had no employment. My wife, I think, still had the gig at Accenture. We had a 2-year-old daughter and we were living in Milton. Like I had this empty trading floor that was like the saddest looking basement you've ever seen because it's where all the action used to happen. And then 9/11 happened. And I remember sitting, like we would go for walks and everything was silent because there's no planes and nobody's leaving. It was like lockdown. And we said, what the hell are we doing in the city? And so we ended up just driving back to Lenox. And within a couple of weeks, we found a house and moved out here. And we've been here ever since.
I've been there ever since. Raised the family out there too?
Yeah. So my daughter moved out here when she was 2. And then we had our son out here. They're about 4 years apart. And now they're up and out. Funny how that works.
What did it mean to be raising kids basically where you were raised back in that area?
It was a norm. I mean, not an accident, right? I mean,
Right.
Obviously my wife was, agreed to do this and was very much part of the, we should move to the country. And we talked about moving to California where her family was from. But we didn't really want to go back to California either. At that point, I think she'd settled into New England forests and hikes. And we used to be huge bike riders. We were doing century rides all the time. And so like, she'd really become an outdoorsy New England person. And that's not really the same as being a California outdoorsy person. And so
Mosquitoes make it so much better. Mosquitoes and horseflies. I mean, come on.
What's not to love?
Kidding. This is where my heart is.
We moved out here quite explicitly to be like, look, the world's a crazy place. We just had, the Twin Towers had just come down. We don't understand what's going on in the world. None of us have any employment. Let's move back to my family, because my sister and my mom and my dad were all here in the Berkshires. And so it was a bit of a running home to where we knew there was a support network. We already had some friends who were still living here, so that it felt like a moving into community, not a running away from things. It's more of a running to things. But once we were here, for me, obviously, it became very comfortable, right? I became very at ease because it's where I grew up, right? I already knew everything, and not much changes in rural counties, right? I mean, the names of the stores change, but not much else. And so, raising kids here very quickly became like, oh no, we're really going to stay here until our kids are out. Although that wasn't the initial decision. I think by the time we got our kids into preschool, we were like, how could we ever think about going anywhere else?
Yeah, this is the right place to be for this type of activity. What's the line back into starting to work again then after that?
So, it was a pretty dark window there, and we got pretty frugal. My wife worked at the post office for a number of years, and I did some consulting here or there. I was emotionally pretty wrecked, honestly, after 9/11. I lost a fair number of people at Cantor Fitzgerald when the towers went down. Not like, I don't want to borrow any glory. I mean, so many people I know were there or, really had to live through it. I was up here in the woods. So, but it was still a hollowing out experience. So I did some consulting locally. I did some work for a company called Wave Systems here for a while that's happened to be in the Berkshires, run by a friend of mine that was sort of a computer security company. And they needed somebody to learn how to be a NSA facility security officer and go to training. And so they like tagged me in to do a bunch of stuff just because I was a competent nerd. But that was like a kind of a brief window. And then started doing a lot of freelance writing. And so I did a bunch of speech writing back then with Matt Hogan, and went on to become whatever he is at Bitwise now, Chief Investment Officer. And so that was sort of he had been my biotech analyst when we were running money together in the 90s. And he hired me when he was running for a speech writing window at a PR firm. I can't remember which one. But he started hiring me to run a bunch of speeches for him on a ghostwriting basis. And that kind of got me back in the groove. Writing in other people's voices was a really fun, brief window. And then he started writing about ETFs because Index Universe had started. And so he just sort of scooped me up into that as well and was like, hey, we know a bunch of people who can write about this stuff. And so a whole bunch of us joined Index Universe and maybe the date wrong, 06 or something like that. And then that eventually became ETF.com and, the last 20 years.
What's that gig actually like for you? So first off, the writing piece of it. Now you had been doing writing and marketing and all these different variations with the late 90s into that whole era. But like to then settle back into, were you just drawn to just like, oh, I know how to communicate about this stuff? I know how to like
Not so much. Like I actually didn't really write very much in the 90s. Like there's not a lot that's...
Well, this is why I'm asking. Like, it's not like you didn't train this up in a way that's obvious.
Some of that, again, like pre-TBI, pre the brain injury, my creative spark was gone. Like there's nothing, I can't think of anything from 1985 to 1997 that I produced that I would even have a copy of, much less that was something I'd be like, hey, I made a thing. It was burned out of me and replaced by avarice and ego, largely. And post the brain injury, I started writing a lot more. Now, some of it was I was also going into therapy and I was, doing some of the work and all that stuff. I don't think I really started writing anything good until the mid 2000s.
So mid 2000s and certainly like the 2010s and whatever else. So this whole ETF.com initial chapter, because that starts off as, how many people are there when you join?
6.
So Index Universe to ETF.com is 6 people, basically.
Yeah, roughly. It was me and Matt Hogan, and Jim Wyatt was running it. Don Friedman, who now runs the digital asset program for advisors, DACFP or DACFA, was there. He and Don Friedman built the first Inside ETFs conferences, so he was sort of part of that initial conference wave. And then our techie Fernando Rivera ran a big group for us in Ecuador that did all the website and data stuff. And then that was the core team, and we had some contractors, and then we ramped pretty quickly. We raised much money. We bought ETF.com, the URL. We decided to launch a data business. We decided to launch a conference business for real. So that was a real hockey stick of entrepreneurial growth on the back of some great business people. Like, I mean, I learned a lot from folks like Jim Wyatt and Matt over the years. Like they got it done, right?
On the scheme of things that were exciting to be a part of, did that feel like, were you really engaged with that whole process? Was that
It was very entrepreneurial, getting your feet dirty, everybody doing everything, which I really like. Like when we were running the fund company briefly in the 90s, I liked that part of it. I liked the open fieldness of it, where there are both no expectations and infinite expectations, meaning that there's nobody who's going to tell you what you need to do at 10 a.m. tomorrow, but there are people who expect you to have done something next year. And I like that window because I like the freedom of it. I like the excitement of it. It's nerve-wracking, right? Because you sort of don't get all the feedback that you get in a big company where you've got your TPS reports and your annual reviews and did you get a 3 or a 3.5? And I've been part of that ecosystem many times, and I'm not a fan. I much prefer the fun part, and the fun part is figuring it out, which I'm feeling really excited to be back at ETF.com because that's back to where we are again. I mean, ETF.com's gone from no employees to probably peaked at 40 or 50 and is now back to a handful.
On the Ascent side of that, and I'm just curious what the experience was for you personally with this. Like, you start off feet dirty, hands dirty, full pigpen mode, and then it grows into something, because everything that's like, there's a time and a space for these things to do what they do. Do you feel like you outgrew it that way around, or what was?
No, it was, so the first ETF.com experience was one of my first, wasn't my first, but it was another private equity experience. And with that comes, and this isn't a diss on any of the people who were partners with us then. I think this is just how private equity works. There's that initial, we have a brilliant idea and we have a good team and we're raising money component of it, which is selling your idea and selling yourself. Then there's we've got the money, now we have to build something part. That's the most fun part. And, in my experience, that lasts about a year or two. And then there's great, how are we thinking about the value of this business? How are we thinking about exit strategies? How are we thinking about revenue growth? Those are all very legitimate and important parts of the capital process, but they're not the fun parts for me. And so by the time we got to that window where it was like we'd had some success, we were growing, we were spending the money, and we're starting to think about, great, what are things worth? What are our exit strategies? Then it became, Dave, you're focused on the data business. And so I went very heads down with Elizabeth Kashner and really productized and put a boundary around the ETF data business, which we then sold to FactSet as part of the sort of multi-step exit liquidity of that version of ETF.com. So I went from being broader and focused on writing and focused on commentary to a year and a half, 2 years of being very heads down in data methodology and programming and R coding and whatever to get that ready to sell. And then I spent a year at FactSet sort of bedding it down with Elizabeth and a whole team of people we brought over from ETF.com. I think it was like 11 or 12 of us when they bought us out to sort of get it instantiated before I then got hired back at ETF.com again.
So getting hired back at ETF.com, let's jump all the way to this kind of like fun part, because this kind of comes a little bit out of nowhere. Right?
Oh, completely. I was at ETF.com. I had to agree to go to FactSet as part of the deal. And I had a contract there for a year, like that tied me up for a certain amount of time. And so I came to the end of that sort of initial year and kind of was just fully planning on riding it out at FactSet. It was a good job. It's a great company, great benefits, good people. I knew the place, right? I knew the data. It was ours. We built it. We had the resources of a giant company behind us. And then in the midst of everything else at ETF.com getting sold, the URL, the thing called ETF.com, and the website got sold to SIBO, the exchange. And Laura Morrison, who's a dear friend of mine, had come over there, and Chris Condon, I'm going to get his name wrong. Anyway, the new CEO literally came in and poached me. And it was just like, we would love you to come back and run this business for us, because they had just bought it. And they were like, what do we do with this? And I sort of knew where the bodies were buried, and there was still a lot of cleanup to do. So that looked really exciting. And I took the offer to jump back to be the CEO of ETF.com. And it did not go particularly well. Within months, the senior management had sort of flipped. Different people, like Chris had left, the current CEO, and the new CEO didn't particularly care about the business. So it became very quickly that I jumped in to go build a thing, and then spent a lot of time not really building very much until eventually it got sold again. But I left before it got sold again. As soon as it became clear that we weren't really going to be doing anything with it inside SIBO, I then jumped over to build the Vetify thing with Tom Lydon and Tom Hendrickson, and start that series of roll-ups for the last 5 years.
Do you really like the rolling up of things? I mean, I know you like the getting dirty hands building. It's so much work.
The irony is merging companies together is a ridiculous amount of work with very low personal payoff. Like, nobody ever really pats you on the back and says, good job, you figured out how to get these two things to talk to each other. No, it's, I don't enjoy that part of it at all. It's a part I know how to do. The part that I think I add value in is in branding and helping figure out, when you put three things together, what is the new thing actually called and look like it stand for, and what's its voice. And that was a big part of the work at Vetify, was taking ETF trends and ETF database and advisor perspectives and Illyrian indexes and like, I don't know, 7 or 8 different things before we actually named the thing Vetify, and figuring out how to tie them all together in a way that made a coherent story. That's a fun task, but being part of companies that are in the middle of merging is not fun. Not in my experience.
No, but you've got the experience. It's just, it's interesting. These things that they basically get stuck to us along the way.
Yeah.
They're the annoying cactus thing you hike past and you're like, what is on my sock? I can't take this off with my fingers, and it's stabbing me everywhere.
Yeah. Look, there are people out there with far worse and far more horrific superpowers that they keep getting tapped to use when they don't want to. If mine is being able to live with the uncertainty of being in mid-merging companies, that doesn't seem so bad.
It's not so bad. All right. I'm taking us here because I know we're going to get sidetracked in this alone. I've got notes. I've been listening as we're going. I think there's like 4 pages of notes so far, which is just, yeah, it is what it is. Okay. So first off, do the ads for MetaMarket, do they exist online anywhere? Like,
oh my God, I have no idea. I actually have no idea. I should go look for them. That's a really good question.
Funny enough, like the whistling thing, and I would not have been consuming any markets television really, aside from just out of like a homework assignment or something in the late 90s. But the whole like whistling, saluting thing, and only because what's the 80s movie where the Russians like invade the small town?
Red Dawn.
And Red Dawn, when they're all they're saying the Pledge of Allegiance, they get like mowed down or whatever. I'm just like picturing like, I don't know why I'm picturing that in the commercial. It's obviously not the
not the vibe we're going for.
Not the vibe we're going for, but all right, I'm looking for those commercials later. This idea of not being, as a kid, not being a latchkey kid, and even being like a no lock kid. A, I know exactly what you mean, but B, like that framing is kind of wild. Do you feel this no lock thing through the rest of life?
Yeah, I do, in a way that makes me feel like I've had guardian angels standing on my shoulder my entire life. Like, I'm not kidding when I say that, like, I've never lived a place you couldn't walk into. And it's not that we're desperate to have criminals show up, but look, like during the lockdown, when we thought the world was going to end, and it was the scariest and the least amount of information, and we had to have the conversation between my wife and I about like, well, what do like as a family, what do we do in this situation? We talked about bringing the kids home, like all the normal things. But then the question becomes like, well, we've always chosen not to own a gun. Like, which in the country, I should point out, in the country, that's a choice, because most people in the country own a gun, and not because they're afraid of people showing up and stealing their cars. It's because the freaking bears in the yard all the goddamn time, and sometimes they're rabid, or it's because the coyotes get in to the pen with the rabbits. Like, I mean, there are reasons to own a gun when you live as rural as we live. But growing up, there were guns on the farm. We didn't have them in my own house because my father was a conscientious objector. And so growing, like we just decided when we moved to the country that we weren't going to be a house that has a gun. And so we revisited that when everything seemed like it was going to end in the pandemic. And we said, look, I think there are two kinds of people who live the way we live. They're ammunition people and they're covered plate people. And what that means is like when the shit really hits the fan and you're walking over to your neighbor's house, what are you walking over there with? Are you walking over there with a gun because you want something that they have? Or are you walking over there with leftovers because you're worried they may not have something? And we just made the decision that whether it means we're the first ones dead in all of this craziness, we're just covered plate people. That's just who we are. And we recognize that bites in the ass. And we've had experiences where that does bite you in the ass. And we continue to choose to be covered plate people.
No locks and covered plates. I can get behind this. Young Dave, working at the newspaper, working at the radio station, playing D&D. Is all this kind of the beginning of the marketing, the brand building, all that stuff? Like, it seems like all those components.
Yeah, I would say it's more that, like my favorite college class ever was linguistics. And not because it was like, I want to learn about language, because it was like the nerdy, it was like the philosophical linguistics. It was the Roland Barthes death of the author stuff, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I think that was my favorite class is that symbol sets are how I've always had to make sense of a world I don't understand. Like from a neurology perspective, I've come to understand I just don't pick up on stuff. There's a lot of stuff I just don't pick up on. People can look at a row full of people and be like, those 3 people are angry. And I'll be like, okay, I'm going to need 20 minutes to figure out what it is you're getting off this person's face that's angry. That's one of the classic autism tests is they do just the eye bars and you're supposed to assign emotional valence to them. And I'm like I do worse than common chance. It's crazy. So for me to interact with people, it's always been about like, oh, when presented with this information, people react that way. When people are saying like, so behavioral finance, marketing, like any of that stuff that like tries to describe the messiness of humans in a way that can be packaged up and understood and recategorized and worked with, I've always been all in on that. So language is a piece of that, but marketing, advertising, behavioral finance, decision-making, gambling, poker, those things have been like Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, right? Give me these tight, constrained rule sets where I can stick human behavior in and then try to figure it out. That's my jam.
I love the idea that we need these things as humans. Like we need things to get obsessed with, very passionate about, because they give us the tools to have like a metaphorical construct to lay over other aspects of it.
Yeah, or to patch our wounds, right? To cover our holes.
Both too, yeah.
Yeah.
The healing potions are real.
Yeah.
This idea of, I'm going to be fascinated by this because I think this is as I know you, is the lowest job on the totem pole of being the runner and then slowly like assuming responsibilities. Have you tried to pass that? Have you passed that story, but have you tried to like raise your kids with that mindset? You're now adult children with that mindset.
I don't think I've ever had a conversation with my kids about like career arcs or career planning. I have spent a lot of time and a lot of intention with them. And I said my wife and I, because let's be clear, I'm not raising these kids. Trying
to eye test comment.
Exactly.
You're what?
Too many eyes. We have tried to create an environment that creates responsibility and rewards hard work and understands that responsible risks are important and not to be avoided. And so, you know, we've done, compared to everybody else we know in our sort of parenting cohort, we are the insane ones that let our kids do everything and that other parents probably worried about. Because, you know, both of our kids, I think, got pocket knives on their 7th birthday. Like we taught them how to make fire before they were 10. And then we would, like, when they were bored, we would send them outside with knives to go make fire, right? And we taught them how to use power tools. Like, we've always tried to put them right in the front of doing the thing. And so consequently, you know, when our kids got to the age where they could just sort of make their own decisions about whatever they're going to spend their time on, they're 18, they're out of the house, they're taking welding classes and going out on boats to count fish for, conservancies. And like, they just find things to actually do. And so it's not so much that I think I've given them that sense of you can go do anything, just start at the bottom. I've just drilled into them. It's like, you do the work that's in front of you that actually makes a difference. And eventually that probably pays off. And if you didn't, at least you were two hands getting something done.
I think this ties beautifully into this idea of, and this was, you said this around the brain injury, was that shift from like the must win attitude to the build a life mindset.
Yeah, there is something inherently human about that competitive streak. And I see it. And I do think it shows up in young men. Like I definitely showed up in me. Like puberty hit me over the head, like a hammer, right? I changed. I became very aggressive. I became very me. I did all of the right things for all the wrong reasons, meaning like I lost the weight and I got more serious about studying and I got more serious about finding a girlfriend. But it wasn't that I wanted a relationship. I wanted to find a girlfriend, here's an object
Trophy,
that I am
right,
missing. And
yeah.
like, I need to find a girlfriend and buy a car. Like they were the same.
I have a girlfriend in a car-shaped hole somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. So like, and I see that. Like you see other people in the world, and you see that same thing, and that's what faded. And I'm deeply grateful for it. Very deeply grateful for it.
You talked about 1985 to 1997, nothing creative coming out of you. When do you start Nadig.com? When do you start the writing, whether what's in public versus what's in private?
Right after 9/11. After 9/11, really. I'd had the URL I've had for freaking ever. I think I bought it in 89. Like the first time I could get it through ICANN, I bought Nadig.com. And for years, it was really expensive. Like for the first couple of years I owned the URL, it was like hundreds of dollars a year at a time I did not have it. But I'm glad I hung on to it because otherwise it would be owned by Indian dentists.
Right.
Because Nadig is apparently a very big name in Indian dentists. I get at least 5 or 10 requests a year to buy it from me. They're all from India. So
all from India,
which Nadig is technically a German derivation, but nobody in Nadig actually really uses that as their last name. They spell it differently. But Nadig in India is all over the place. But so I didn't start really putting content there until probably right around 99, 2000, which was the first time I really started blogging. I remember I wrote a couple things around the birth of my daughter in 99, was when I started kicking that off. And then I really didn't start writing regularly again until after 9/11.
Was it just, what was the value in the expression to you then? Obviously it's evolved over time for you, but
well, it's funny, in that window in the early 2000s, I wrote mostly under pen names. I wrote very little under my own name because I was I think incorrectly believed that I had to protect and build a personal brand that connected Dave Nadig with finance. And therefore, if I ever wrote about anything that wasn't in that lane, it was going to be a distraction. So I did a lot of ghostwriting. I did a lot of writing for anonymously. I did a lot of writing pseudonymously for magazines and stuff like that under pen names. And that was a decent part of my income in the early 2000s. It didn't really become, I don't know, I've never had the kind of creative drive that a lot of creative writers I know have. I produce zines, I produce music, I produce little things. To sit down and write a book, it's just never going to be my thing, Sit down and write an album, it's never been my drive, And at this age, at this point I'm pushing 60, I don't think it's going to become it. I know a lot less people have late careers, but I've never had the drive for it, and I've beaten myself up about it. I've given myself crap about not being more driven to create or to play more music or to write longer form stuff or to write fiction in particular, which I just really don't ever do. But at this point, I think I'm giving myself a pass.
I think it's a valuable pass because you're not giving a pass on any creativity or any expression. You're just saying these are the wrong domains, modes, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. Although it's also, I don't think I have, it's always easy to say this about oneself, so please call me on my own BS, but I don't think I have that much of me tied up in my output and what gets left behind. Like I'm not a saver, right? I don't have, I've taken some gorgeous photographs in my life. There are photographs where I look at them and I'm like, that's really amazing. I don't have them printed and hanging on a wall. I haven't sent them to anybody. I didn't turn them into postcards. And honestly, I hope my wife has them in the file somewhere, because I don't keep them somewhere. Right. And same with my writing. Like I've stumbled across some stuff I wrote when I was a kid, but I don't have like an archive of it. And I know that's very different than you. Like you've really made some efforts to create personal archives and to find ways to go back. And I know lots of people who I very deeply respect and admire their work, who spend a lot of time and energy making sure that their archive's intact. Our friend Ben Hunt, I know, has talked a lot about this. Jim O'Shaughnessy talks a lot about this. And I get it, but it's just, I've never been able to do it. And so I've just sort of given up.
These are things you either trick yourself into or you accept that. Because even if you trick yourself into being able to do it, you look at it and you're like, there's no real point to this.
I figure that what's going to survive is YouTube, and therefore my kids are going to mostly learn about me by watching this like 30 years when I'm dead.
I'm right there with you.
But it's also all gone. Like that's the other thing is like I had a website, like Nadig.com existed for the entirety of the 90s. I don't think you can find any of it. I don't have any of it. So like, I don't know, 100 articles or blog posts I posted over those years, maybe one a month for however many years, maybe more. They're not on the Wayback Machine. They just don't exist. And that's a weird thing. That early internet is really round-holed.
It's a weird thing also because between the turns of private equity and the other things that have happened, like I remember being so excited when we found some like old band or scene page that we were a part of from like the mid 90s. And being like, this exists.
It's so hard to find that stuff.
But then it disappeared. And I was like, it was there. And then now it's not, like, I don't know, during the pandemic or something, we went looking for it again. We're like, remember we found that like
I feel like
years
there's
ago?
a missing piece of like somebody must have the archives. Some guy who's running the well in San Francisco has to have like a full, the weird thing is that, you know, what survived is Usenet. Mm-hmm. Which,
there you go.
You know, and
right.
I think I probably predate Usenet enough for you. Usenet, I'm guessing, was never a part of your life, really.
It's a thing that I am aware of. And as I've told you before personally, like it was just, I was in the wrong house for that. And that was in other friends' houses. And that's my awareness of things.
It's weird to think that this could have existed, but in the 80s and 90s, you could go to a public news group like rec.games.magic, the Gathering. And the entirety of the people on the internet who wanted to talk about Magic the Gathering could have a coherent conversation at the same time, because that was how few people were on the internet. So, you know, in the early 90s, Rec Games MTG might have had 50 posts a day, like a thin subreddit would be right now.
Right.
And it's most like Reddit is the thing that has survived that is most like Usenet. But it was the entirety of the internet before the internet existed. And it's all still there. That's the wild thing is I can go find, if I go grab an old email, like what was my UMass email? And I punch it into the Google Usenet search thing. Every damn post I've ever made is there.
It's a strange world out there, Dan Nadig.
Very strange. But my blog is gone. Like the actual things I wanted to preserve, gone.
Well, somebody has to keep making stuff to post on the internet so that the sands of time can wash it all away. I am pretty sure. Is there anything you're most excited for and like what's coming next? Like obviously you're at the building phase of this new version of ETF.com. Is there anything else that you're super just excited about working on in the next chapter of your life here?
I am. So a big part of the reason I joined back at ETF.com is because the guy who's running it, Matt Middleton, who also did Future Proof, which some of the people watching may know, they're still listening at this point. His whole shtick is about actually getting people to have conversations, which sounds like really straightforward. It's what you do. Like you're the most obvious example of what I think is actually a trend, which is this resurgence of people recognizing that just getting people talking is the first step in solving almost all of our problems. And so the focus of what we're trying to build at ETF.com is really an engine for having a lot more of those conversations. Obviously, in and around the world of investing in ETFs, that's what's going to, that's the topic.
It's got to be a business.
That's the
This
topic
is not
space,
a business,
right?
That Matt's figured out.
Well, but even here, the topic space is people's individual journeys. And
Exactly.
so you created a boundary around it. the topic space for ETF.com, you can guess what it's going to be. But the point is to have lots of those conversations. And that's cool because most of the way we've used technology in the last 10 years hasn't been to do that. It's one to many. It's been to get social out, right? Not to get lots of one-on-one actual relationships established. And so, look, I don't know whether it's scalable to the same way, a social media post can go viral, but I do think it's valuable enough that we can build a business around it. And also, I think it's noble in the sense that I think it's the first step in getting things done. Whatever your thing is that you want to get done, if it doesn't start with two people talking to each other, it's probably not legitimate.
You can't just sell everything through Facebook ad impressions like the future was promised to us, 10 years ago at this point or something. Dave, if people want to find you on the internet, bug you, where should they look you up these days?
At Dave Nadig, works almost everywhere. Nadig.com for bloggy posts, ETF.com for ETF posts.
Fantastic. Subscribe to Dave in all the places. You won't regret it. Dave Nadig, thanks for finally doing this. You're truly an intentional investor.
Well, Matt, thank you for doing it. And I love your commitment to getting these stories on tape.
Somebody's got to do it, man.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.